All right, we are live. We're a few minutes late. Relax in the comments. It's going to be a marathon with me, yours truly, Ryan Selkis at 2-Bit Idiot, and Balaji Srinivasan at Balaji S. So tell your friends this is happening on Twitter. It's live. We got an interactive Q&A. I already see 12 questions in here, so we're going to have a good time with it. But Balaji, first of all, it's been a crazy year. I think that's a little bit of a trite thing to say, but some years it holds up better than others. And I think one of the things that stuck out to me in your recent Tim Ferriss podcast was either his or your reference to Harry Seldon. And there are some sci-fi readers, I'm sure, in the audience today. I would say that you are crypto's version of Harry Seldon. And taking a holistic look at history, both recent and longer term, and applying some probabilities to them, and a little bit of kind of tech knowledge, and ultimately that's going to lead to some pretty interesting insights. We had a great conversation 2 years ago, or last year, 2 hours.
Last year, yep.
We're going to do it all again, and just want to thank you for taking the time. So welcome back. Let's do this. How you feeling?
All right. Cool. I'm glad to be here. And I hope, like Harry Seldon, we can, my only goal is to preserve civilization. So if we can pull that part off.
You and me both, man. Yeah, 100%. I mean, obviously I think that was a flattering description that I read. And it is really the result of you being pretty much spot on and having an incredible run the last couple of years in terms of navigating COVID and kind of thinking about where the puck is moving and how some of these trends are getting pulled forward. And I've known you long enough to trust you, but even I was taken aback a little bit, some of the kind of early conversations we had in the beginning of COVID. And remember, I was, one of the first people that listened to you kind of wholeheartedly when we looked at the numbers together. But it's less about looking at the COVID data and more about all of the other kind of trends that have pulled in a direction that you'd kind of predicted back in late 2019 and really accelerated throughout the course of COVID. So I want to orient this conversation, obviously, given it's a crypto crowd, to some of the relevant crypto predictions. And I think you and I kind of share this worldview that there is no such thing as like crypto and the rest of the world, because we both think that Web3 is all that it's been cracked up to be by proponents like us and other entrepreneurs, and that a lot of this demand for Web3 solutions or crypto solutions has actually been pulled forward. So I want to frame the conversation. Maybe we're going to go off on a bunch of different tangents, but maybe with kind of 3 bullet points, right? So if we had 3 bullet points, 3 core themes to align on, and what we expect for the new year to be the trends to watch. Let's start there, like the major branches of the tree, and then we'll kind of pull on different sub-branches and twigs and leaves throughout the rest of the conversation and pull on audience questions. So for me, I have my set of answers and just wrote about them in the thesis. But in terms of key trends to watch, where are you keeping your eyes right now as we go into 2022?
Good question. I think I feel that there's always a trade-off between different planes. I gave a talk at the Solana conference recently where I talked about how the real layer that we need to focus on as a space is L0, not L2, which is a scaling layer, but L0, which is like the policy and ethics layer. And those are interrelated. That say full stack includes the moral stack. If we cannot give a justification for what we're doing as to why it's actually good and imperative and not simply a way to make money, then we will not be able to continue doing it because we will be met with a moral objection. And I think that, there's, so I think number one, most important is we're kind of already aligned on this. The good thing is it's sort of being implicit within the space that, there's been a story, as great as, for example, Airbnb and Dropbox and Reddit are as companies, their story was relatively faint. It was just, okay, they all kind of were Y Combinator founded and, they listened to Paul Graham. But our story in crypto, in Web3, in Bitcoin, it starts with Satoshi and it starts with the white paper. And so whether you're at Binance or you're at Kraken or you're at Coinbase or you're at a DeFi thing or you're a Bitcoin maximalist, whatever it is, you know that story, and inflation is bad and deflation is good and decentralization is good and centralization is bad and so on and so forth, right? So I think taking that and then extending that forward, such that it's not a message of pure anarchy, but rather one of crypto civilization rather than crypto anarchy. I think that's one. And why do I say that? It's because I actually think we're going to win. And because we're going to win, we need a plan to win. Like, that's to say, we need a, it's saying like, act like you've been in the end zone before, if you've ever heard that, right? And so absolutely, it is important. I mean, I'm not saying to be self-satisfied. I'm not saying to just think that history is going to take us there. But in a world where cryptocurrencies, where all of what we're doing is not a couple trillion, but a couple hundred trillion, where it truly is the center of the world economy, how are we responsible stewards of that? How do we not simply deconstruct existing institutions, but replace them with something that's provably better for all people? So that's kind of the thing I think about the most, is sort of the moral and ethical foundations of what we're doing. And so let's call that number one. And because absolutely there's going to be a moral argument. And just to give you early innings in that, it's like the attempt to try to say, Bitcoin consumes power, therefore, it's bad because, power consumption is bad. And, the way to deconstruct that and the way to respond is, if you saw the Roots of Progress review of J. Storrs Hall's books, Where's My Flying Car? He talks about this concept of, quote, ergophobia, where essentially people believe that power can only be consumed. They don't really think of power that they don't think that power can be produced, or they think producing more power is bad, and they don't distinguish between clean energy and they don't versus polluting energy. And so like this whole attack on, BTC consumes power, therefore it's bad. The response to that is actually clean energy production is good. We should have an unlimited amount of clean energy production, and we should build nuclear power plants. And if Bitcoin mining stimulates that, then that's to the good. So you reject the premise, you go to the root. To give another example, the entire KYC system, while one must comply with it by law when there's a gun to one's head, the way to respond to it in the medium to long term is not to simply make edits around it and to propose, slight changes, but rather to say privacy over KYC, and that the government cannot collect what it cannot secure or should not collect it. That's to say, if it's constantly being hacked, it's not just the SolarWinds hack, it's the OPM hack, it's just hack after hack where we don't even know the full scope of it, then it's a combination of, the surveillance state and the Keystone Cops, where they're scooping up all this data and keeping it on insecure servers, and the harm that is caused from those leaks is far in excess of any potential harm prevented by KYC. So the government cannot or should not be able to collect what it cannot secure, privacy over KYC. This is another example of what I'd consider a moral foundation that underpins any kind of policy effort. We need to put the ball all the way in the other end zone. Just to give a third example, and this is one that certainly I talk about a lot, I think about a lot, but I think is ridiculously important. Satoshi Nakamoto and Nakamoto ConsenSys give us decentralized truth. This book, The Truth Machine, this one by Vigna and Casey that came out a few years ago? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite good. It's particularly far-sighted. I mean, there's nothing, okay, let me put it like this. There's nothing they were talking about at the time that you and I and others and so on were talking about. It wasn't like in that sense, but as a popularization and as something that was quite far-sighted given the time and place that it was written. I think The Truth Machine is a really good book because it shows that it's not just about what BTC somebody holds, it's about what, if anything, somebody holds, and it's about what anybody held to be true at a given time, the assertions, right? So that's a third thing, and kind of comparable to the other two, which is the ledger of record, reproducible research, truly reproducible research, where all the stuff is on chain and reproducible, as opposed to a permalink that's not really permanent and that can evaporate. That concept of the ledger of record is like a third thing where, again, we put the ball all the way in the crypto end zone. We have a vision of the good, and we work towards that. And we start from first principles, which doesn't require any of these legacy institutions to continue existing. And, if they do exist, that's great for them, bully for them, wonderful. But we start from a clean slate. In the same way as I just recently tweeted, Netflix didn't have some vision in its future for Blockbuster, right? Apple wasn't, talking about, BlackBerry, well, it's a jewel, we need to preserve it or reform it. No, like if you can't envision a fully, a future that replaces them with better institutions, you're not going to get there, and you need the moral foundations. Okay, so I know that's a long answer, but that's number one. Moral foundations, super important.
Yep.
Number two, I mean, your PDF, by the way, is amazing. It's actually it's like a mini book, and you're motivating me to get my 1,000-page, magnum opus out. But
that's why I do it. I know that you've had this for so long up your sleeve.
I know I have. I've been chipping. I have been improving it and so on. But whatever. TLDR is the first one. Will be War and Peace. But fine. Okay. But I'm going to get it out. Exactly. However, I'm not going to be able to do justice to all the many different things that you surveyed in your inimitable way. It's really, honestly, the single best resource in the space. And I know I'm a small investor in Messari, but I really got to say that I would just point anybody to this for the snapshot of the space for such a fast-moving space. You did a phenomenal job on it.
I appreciate that.
I think that, in addition to the moral thing, it's pretty clear that, my Olaf said many years ago, and I think it's true, we're in a polychain world. This has been true for some time. It is going to be something where we have basically chains for many different kinds of applications, special purpose chains, smart contract chains, privacy chains, this chain, that chain. And if people thought that there'd be one chain that would rule them all for every application, I don't think that is the case. I think that is, in fact, obviously not the case. I think digital gold is a super important application, and I'm glad that that's on an immutable chain. But I'm also glad that we have programmable and mutable chains. I'm glad we have highly private chains that are optimized just for that, right? So one way of thinking about just how early we are is how little interchain and interoperation there is, And so I think this is already there, where folks, if you looked at actually the diagram that Preeti got some, in my view, silly flack for, which is a good diagram of what a Web3 stack might look like. And I RT'd something that compared that to a blog, which also had a load balancer and other kinds of things, right? I think the interchain, the interop is going to be something where there's something like Rails for crypto, okay? Where, if you think about it, Rails pioneered this MVC model, which was, model view controller. And I know this is a little technical for some of your audience, but bear with me for a second. Essentially, that entire generation of Web 2 applications, one can think of them in retrospect as having a single centralized hub that everything else was a spoke around, right? So if you think about the history of the internet, it was P2P, peer-to-peer, with everything connecting to each other directly. Then it was this MVC hub and spoke topology of Web 2.0, where you were, you had a hub like a Facebook or a Twitter or a Dropbox or whatever, and then everybody connected to it. And now Web 3.0 is not P2P or MVC, but it's CBC, so client, blockchain, client. And so that's something where you do have a central state, which is the blockchain, but it's decentralized state, so it's also peer-to-peer and programmable, and it's monetizable. So it combines the peer-to-peer and programmability of the peer-to-peer internet, the first internet, and the monetizability and central and global state of Web 2.0 to get something that's the best of both worlds. With that said, we need to actually build the tooling for that. Client, blockchain, client is a different architecture than MVC. It starts with thinking about relatively thin desktop clients, essentially souped up wallets, right? And blockchains in the back end. And modern Web3 app developers are going to live in a multi-chain world. So in the same way that if you look at Django or you look at Rails, they have bindings for multiple databases, and multiple database support is actually typical now. You'll have your Postgres and you'll have your data warehouse. You might have your Redis or your Q or other kinds of things. You have different data stores you're using on the back end for different applications. The multi-chain application stack for the client, blockchain, client architecture has to be built. I'm actually interested in Rust in particular for this because, and again, it's a little technical, but a lot of the Electron-based desktop web app development basically just uses Chrome, and it's quite slow. But Rust can do, pretty good desktop development, and a lot of people are learning Rust for Solana. So I'm excited for the client, blockchain, client stack to come out, and that I think will be a massive accelerant for lots of applications. Moreover, these kinds of things, the next Rails, the next Django, will have a token associated with it. So those could be multi-billion-dollar enterprises or operations in their own right. It would essentially be something where you have this stack, this Rails, this Django, and you have all these chains that it's intermediating, and it has a DEX built in where you buy that token or coin, and it just kind of goes, and it's like, okay, you need some graph token, you need some Filecoin, you need some Solana, you need some Ethereum for your ENS registration. You're basically buying coins to use for purposes, for decentralized storage, for decentralized login, for decentralized VPN, for decentralized X and decentralized Y. And so that means a whole new generation of Web3 stacks will get built on this blockchain client architecture. So that's kind of a second big thing. And I know, by the way, this is not like the super fashionable stuff that people are talking about publicly necessarily, but this is kind of stuff.
This is exactly where I wanted to start, because I think you have a phenomenal way of being able to lay things out, build the foundation, and then we're going to be able to have a bunch of different jumping off points for both 1 and 2 so far. So, and they kind of map to a couple of my core themes as well. So I want to hear your number 3, and then we'll kind of get
number
deeper
3
into the discussion.
So number 3 is, if it wasn't already obvious, like the full globalization of everything we're doing. As I've been tweeting about, but just to kind of emphasize, most billionaires, like something like 75% of billionaires are not American. Most venture capital is outside the US. Obviously, most of the world population is outside the US. Most of the internet users are outside the US. Most of the GDP, annual GDP is outside the US. Most is in Asia, depending if you count by PPP. Hundreds of millions of people have come online in India. There's all of this energy around the world. And as you're aware, many SAFTs nowadays are blocking Americans. It's got the list of, do you know what I'm talking about, with like the list of restricted jurisdictions?
North Korea. And I've had a couple of angel deals that I've been participating in, and they're like, well, you have an international entity set up. And I said, no, I haven't done it. I'm, trying to build a company. I haven't really, done the paperwork to get up and running in the Virgin Islands yet. So it's painful.
So I mean, this is a new thing, right? Or it's not that new. 2017 had it as well, right? But it is the bit license squared, where people, because New York overestimated its leverage, it thought it could simply impose regulations on people. You lived through that whole thing, right? You were actually in New York at that time.
I was in New York. I was there the day of the bit license hearings. I was actually, I almost said something that would have been bad OPSEC, but yeah, I was in New York that day, we'll get to this in a little bit, but I think that we're kind of living through a similar time right now that I'm actually very worried about with Gary Gensler and the SEC. If we do have a dip in the market next year, he could capitalize on that, much like Losky did in 2014 with the collapse of Mt. Gox. And I think that's probably one of the worst case scenarios that we could have across a lot of these tokenized projects in 2022. We'll come back to that. I want you to finish the
I think it's very important.
talk,
we should talk about that. Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But
let's wrap the thought
on
here.
the third thing. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I want to hear the rest of your framework for the globalization thesis.
So the third thing, so if the first one was the moral stack, right, and the second one was kind of the tech stack, the third is you call it the global stack or the global vantage point, which is, here's the big difference. There's many ways of cutting Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. I actually think it's a useful formulation. If you saw my tweet from a few months ago, Web 1.0, and by the way, the internet is not the web. The internet began decades before the web. The World Wide Web is Tim Berners-Lee's invention, as opposed to the routing layer, packet routing layer underpinning everything. So they're not synonymous, but if you say Web 1.0 and you kind of refer to it in this sort of capacious sense, that was just, can we build it? Will browsers work, right? Will this internet thing work? Can the graphical web browser actually serve? It's just like, will the bandwidth be there, et cetera? It's just like, can we build it? Okay. And this is kind of the classic era of VC, which actually predates Web 1.0. But the classic era of VC, of course, is part of the desktop software aspect, and a huge part of it was just the technical risk. Can we build it? Then in Web 2.0, it's not like technical risk went away. But with the profusion of, in particular, the LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP in the early 2000s, and then other things, that's what enabled Facebook. That's what enabled Twitter. Rails enabled Twitter, and so on. And Django enabled Instagram. And so that whole generation of companies, the Web 2, it's not like there wasn't technical risk, but it wasn't the primary risk. The primary risk was market risk. So if Web 1.0 was, can we build it? Web 2.0 is, we can build it, but will they buy it? Okay, so will the public actually buy it? There's market risk. And so you can make the application, you're pretty sure you can make the screens on web, on mobile, whatever, but would that human behavior be adopted? Would people Snapchat and Instagram, or would it be like, Frontback, for example, which is a fine company, but just, there's like, take a photo of yourself and then something in front of you. The reason I just bring that up is Snapchat, of course, wasn't just the behavior of a disappearing message. They had all this execution around it. But that core behavior has to be popular enough, that fruit fly experiment, to see if someone will actually use this new consumer behavior. And that's really hard to predict a priori, right? So Web 2 was, we can build it, but will they buy it? And now Web3 is yet different. We can build it, and we know the public will buy it, but will the bad guys ban it? Okay, so that's now actually the top level risk, right? The top level risk is regulatory risk. It is political risk, because what Web3 is it's a reform of all of these ancient institutions. It is obviously a reform of the Fed. It is a reform of the banks. It is also less obviously a reform of journalism and media because of the decentralized truth that we talked about. It is a reform of the legal system with smart contracts. It is a reform of governance itself in the form of on-chain, not just monetary policy, but policy, as is starting to happen in Miami and New York City and Wyoming and in El Salvador, where cities and states are merging with decentralized networks to offload, at least in part, some of their policy to a globally more fair network than a local state. They are intentionally limiting their local government in the interests of bringing in more business. Wyoming cannot rewrite the Ethereum blockchain, but it's respecting DAOs. El Salvador cannot seize BTC, but it's using BTC, right? This is something where this integration between far-sighted jurisdictions and these global networks, I think, will proceed. And so the Web3 kind of model, though, on the other hand, you've got folks who are not far-sighted; they are extremely near-sighted. Oh, you turn off your video, Ryan, maybe by accident.
I should be back.
Okay.
Let me refresh. I can see myself, so I'll just
okay. Yeah,
turn
it just went
on.
to blurred. I will wait till Ryan reappears.
Should be back.
Oh, you're blurred for some reason. It's weird. Maybe. Okay, I will talk to the blur. Maybe you can figure that out. So Web 3.0 is Web 1.0 was can we build it, and Web 2.0 was we can build it, but will they buy it? Web 3.0 is we can build it, we know people will buy it, but will others ban it? Will they stop this voluntary consensual transaction between two adults? Will they intervene? Will they interfere? Right? And so on the one hand, at the subnational and international level, we're doing phenomenally well, right? We have Wyoming and we have Miami and we have Texas and we have New York City. And then internationally, we have Switzerland and we have Singapore and we have El Salvador and we have Dubai and so on and so forth. It is so subnationally and internationally, we're doing quite well. It is at the national level where essentially both the US and China are running these rearguard assaults on this thing, right? Now, of the two of them, I call this the counter decentralization, just like, the Reformation, the counter Reformation, which, Protestantism and the Catholic Church. You blurred again, by the way, just FYI. Whatever you just did.
I think it might just be for you. It sounds like we got a bunch of folks in the comments that are saying that we look good, or maybe they just want me blurry. So,
all right,
hopefully it kicks back in.
Sure. So, so subnationally and internationally, we're doing okay. At the national level for the U.S. and China, obviously we're not. And then there's all kinds of countries in the middle, Europe, India, et cetera, regions in the middle, I should say, Russia, et cetera, et cetera. But basically, that's the third big thing is the most important thing for a Web3 founder is global mobility. Because that's the only way that, they truly have leverage against the state. Ceteris paribus, that Web3 founder who abides by all laws, but consciously chooses their jurisdiction will outcompete somebody who, is basically, my country, good or bad, right? And the thing about that is I actually do think that the rest of the world has an advantage here because one thing that's funny is a lot of Americans actually have sort of a reticence to emigrate. And I find this interesting because the U.S. is not just a nation of immigrants, it's a nation of emigrants, emigrants, right? And, something like 90% of the country is either an immigrant themselves or descended from somebody. And, it wasn't unpatriotic to leave Poland or India, Poland hundreds of years ago or 100 years ago, or India, last week. It was just a practical, pragmatic decision that you made because you didn't have the, resources to reform the jurisdiction locally. So in a sense, immigration is as American as anything else, leaving, your home in search of a better life. But for whatever reason, many other countries have the will to do that, or their citizens have the will to do that. And China may have the will, but its citizens increasingly won't have the way, they won't have the means to go overseas, I think, because lots of countries are erecting immigration barriers against China, at least if China doesn't have hard power. So for all of these people in the middle, the excluded middle, between the US and China, that's something like 80% of the world population, those people who are globally mobile, those founders from there, the global founder can do something that the American and Chinese founders cannot. That's a really important concept, which gives them, in their own way, an arbitrage opportunity, which is good. It's kind of like the competitive advantage of being born near a river or like a mine or something like that. At least in the olden days, you might argue, well, they get polluted if they're near a mine, but there was a natural resource that they had. So there's an artificial resource that people have by virtue of being citizens of the rest of the world, which is a greater degree of global mobility, potentially. Not that their passport can necessarily get them in everywhere, that varies country to country, but that's like the third thing. So just to recapitulate, I know that was a long kind of thing, but it had hopefully some depth. Number one,
moral high ground,
moral stack,
interoperability, and globalization.
That's right. And the second one, I'd say not just interop, but a Rails for crypto, a Django for crypto that embraces the blockchain client architecture and that has a coin which you can buy, and you just hold that coin, and all the other transactions are dexified behind the scenes, so you don't have to requisition Filecoin, et cetera. This is something, by the way, I don't know if you remember that I talked about this many years ago, that eventually Bitcoin would be considered a system resource, just like RAM and hard drive space and bandwidth, right? The amount of BTC that your computer has allows it to decide whether to run a computation locally or whether to outsource it to something else, right? And by the way, you can reconcile that where what you do is you just load BTC onto a high capacity chain with some chain interop. You load $10 million or $100 million or whatever, and then that can just blast all the microtransactions you want. Like that's to say the way that I think BTC scales. I mean, nothing against Lightning. There seem to be some things that are working with it, but much of the volume, to my knowledge, is based on either A, off chain, which is in itself a form of scaling, or other chain. Right. So rather than L2 or off chain, other chain is yet another approach where you're effectively loading it onto another chain. And this is all the wrapped Bitcoin stuff. It's WBTC, which is a trusted version, but Ren BTC and others, which you're well aware of. Right. And for all the traction metrics I can see, and I might be wrong about this, so please correct me, that's just off to the moon. So I'm not actually worried about Bitcoin scaling anymore. And in fact, Bitcoin can scale for micropayments, macro payments, programmable payments, whatever. You just load it onto a chain that facilitates that. Ta-da. Right. And eventually, when Zcash is working on ZRC20s, right? So you might be able to have ZBTC or something like that. I mean, arguably Zcash is kind of a ZBTC, but you could actually have like a formal ZBTC if you wanted, like a private version, not just a programmable version, or not just a micropayments version. Okay, so that's my download.
Give me the 15-second synopsis of point one. You said you were going to go through all three. I think so. That's a good synopsis of number two. Number three is globalization. Number one.
Yeah. So
just to
moral
recap
stack, tech stack, global stack.
You showed up late.
Yeah. So the moral stack is why are we doing something that's of moral importance and necessity and an imperative to refresh these institutions and going case by case. You have the Chad yes meme.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I'm literally embodying it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. With the chin out, right? Exactly, right. So yeah, you're embodying. So you just have to be like, Chad, yes, total stare down when people try to pull these moral arguments on you, because that indicates what's actually happening, even if it seems like a stupid Twitter slap fight, is they are seeing whether you have your own separate moral stack or whether they can root access you there. Right? They might not be able to beat you at the tech level or the markets level, but they can beat you on the moral level. Then it's like twisting the curlies and you get hit. So we have to have that depth, that moral depth. It's ridiculously important. It's underappreciated in many ways. That's why there's lots of good stuff that's been happening. I'm a fan of Solana, obviously, and Avalanche. I'm an investor in all this stuff, everything pretty much. Assume I'm an investor in everything, but. There's a pendulum that goes back and forth from ideological to technological to ideological to technological, and we need to swing it back to ideological because that's the way that we're going to defeat this regulatory state that's coming in. So A, moral, B, technical stack, C, global stack. Go ahead.
So
maybe that leads us into the SEC thing.
No, I think that's perfect segue, and I think we have to start there because that seems like the theme of the year for next year, right? We've got an environment where it's been a straight shot up for basically 18 months, and there's been this hot ball of money that's gone from sector to sector DeFi needed its 0 to 1 moment and some catalyst, and then we had yield farming, and then everything took off. And then towards the back half of the year last year, we had the economy starting to come back online, optimism about the election and what that would mean for things settling down politically. Of course, that's in the rearview mirror. And then the economy coming back online, meaning there was going to be a boom in 2021, and yet there was all this excess money in the system. So we had Bitcoin's rise, and then we had the layer ones rallying in Q1. We had the blow off top in Q2. NFTs kind of took back over the summer. So we've had major vertical bull markets, right? And now arguably it's the trend is in the metaverse. We've had these kind of blow off top like parabolic markets for basically 18 years nonstop. And at the same time, that's
18
got the
months
attention
nonstop.
of regulators.
Do you mean 18 months or 18 years?
18 months, yeah. For a year and a half, 18 months nonstop, right? And I think the problem is if we get into an environment next year where things dip, then the regulators and policymakers are basically going to be able to say, you know what, we warned you about this. It doesn't matter from what height we crash. We warned you about this. We need to implement consumer protections. All of these things are securities. We need to be very cautious and actually rein this in and basically give some or multiple governmental bodies the ability to crack down on essentially everything outside of Bitcoin. And then of course they'll come for Bitcoin too. So I think if you started with this line of thought early this year or last year, people would look at you like you're crazy and like a conspiracy theorist. But China, in some respects, is given the playbook for how to shut things down. We've seen other nations, India, kind of teetering, and it looks like
India. Just think of it as all as fog of war, without talking about any specifics. It's all fog of war. Yeah. So
Exactly.
there's both good and bad things happening, and it's complicated. But TLDR, it's not as bad as China.
So this goes to a lot of your thesis, and I want to bring it back to not just the U.S., but the U.S. and Europe, because they're balkanized, and it is difficult to coordinate policy across the EU and the U.S. for different reasons. So we do have this kind of decentralized West that is centralizing. And I think the question that is the most common one that I see in the public comments here is how do we actually position ourselves for this? So I think the moral high ground, you talk about the moral imperative and moral stack, market stack, tech stack. Market stack and tech stack, those will work themselves out naturally. I think right now, if or when the market does cool back off, we're going to have some good answers, and the moral stack and the why behind crypto really bulletproof for some of the attacks that could come next year. How are you thinking about the Western conversation in particular, and kind of how we're positioned going into next year, given that we're still close to the highs in the market? I think a lot of people have done phenomenally well in general, and it remains to be seen which direction we'll go from here. But I tend to think that public sentiment is going to follow where we go with the market cycle.
Well, I actually prepared a slide deck on this many years ago to summarize kind of what to do versus the regulatory state. But I would briefly summarize it with 4 points, which are mobility, being able to move between jurisdictions. We've talked about that already. Mm-hmm. B, technology, which is often you can use technology to legalize a previously, impermissible transaction, right? And sometimes it's a gray area. For example, what Uber did, it was something where you had to have a yellow cab, like a medallion license, in order to have a normal taxi. But anybody could go and set up a sedan company, and you could call them from the yellow pages. And what they did is they said, hey, what we're doing is e-hail, where it is like a telephone call. So we're regulated as a sedan company, but it obviously had the immediacy of the taxis. And so they kind of took something where what had not been anticipated at the time those regulations were written was the presence of a smartphone, a mobile phone, not simply a phone, because there's an assumption that because there's such a delay on getting a sedan, that it would be a different and segmented market that would not compete with taxis. and the advent of the smartphone changed that and changed that assumption, right? Niraj actually has, I think, this funny tweet, which I'll probably butcher, but he's like, "I'm sorry, your financial surveillance regime presumed the presence of trusted intermediaries," something along those lines, right?
Your warrantless surveillance regime, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry that your warrantless surveillance regime was built on the assumption that people would always need intermediaries to transact. Boom. Mm-hmm. That also is a great example. It's not just funny and clever, but it's a part of the moral argument, right? Like, the state, I mean, NSA is still around. All that surveillance stuff that Snowden was talking about is still around. That's not consensual. People did not consent into it. There was no vote that you could have against it. There's no consent of the governed, right? And so the thing about that is, if you have a gun to your head, comply, of course, right? But never submit. Never submit inside, right? Comply, 100% compliance, 0% submission. And because, you recognize that these folks are illegitimate. Like they are not actually acting in the interests of the people, but in the interests of their own position and what have you. There's no provable alignment. It is not that their portfolio rises with the rest of the country. There's lots of, crypto folks who have many problems, but they could prove on-chain holding, right? If you wanted to. And in fact, actually, I think that's going to be a requirement for leaders in the future, is going to be provable alignment with their people. Like the leader, it's a little bit like you hold so much stock as CEO of the company that whatever else people can say, they might say you're dumb, but they can't say you're evil because, you would go down with the ship. Right, you have the highest investment in this thing. That's why people want CEOs to own stock. It's not a panacea. It doesn't solve everything, but it's a good baseline, right? It shows alignment. And then of course, the more coins you hold in common with somebody else, and the longer your holding time period, you at least start to rebuild some degree of alignment. And actually, for this reason, I think that currencies will lead to network states in the same way that languages led to nation states. Like that is actually the interop. If you think about it, language is like an interop between two people. And so people who speak English or people who speak Spanish, like there's a reason for them to cluster in an entity, people who speak Portuguese, right? And currency is like language in that sense of being an interop between people where they both sort of have to value it, understand the paradigms, have taken the fixed cost of setting up the wallet, being as part of that, right? So a new age of network nationalism comes from currencies. So crypto tribalism isn't like a passing thing. It's very much here to stay. And I think we'll rewrite the social network map, right? Where every social network has a currency on it. Maybe an obvious point, but I think a good one. Go ahead.
Well, I think it might be somewhat obvious to folks that have been around for a while in terms of like tribal identities. Although as we're going into this like multi-chain, multi-coin world, I think that's starting to be a little bit more, diffuse, or people aren't necessarily identifying with the coins they hold or the individual assets they own as much as in prior cycles.
Yeah, well, it's tricky because I think there's core and borders, right? Where would you want your core developer to be heavily diversified? Maybe not. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so
I agree with you there. I was actually going to bring it back in the other direction, though, and say there's a more visual way to represent that people are taking crypto as part of their identity, and that's NFTs, right? And you think about all these like PFP communities that have emerged. So even for those that are skeptical that you're like identifying or you're becoming like part of a tribe when you own Bitcoin or you own Ether, because a lot of people won't care, right? Going into your kind of second example and second pillar, you might just kind of pull on all these tokens automatically whenever you need to use a service, without necessarily knowing that you're owning any of these or using them under the hood. That's at scale. I think the thing that is going to persist isn't necessarily going to be identifying based on the tokens that you hold, but maybe identifying with the visual like representations of what you hold. So that could be digital art, it could be metaverse land, like where you choose to live in the metaverse. It could be, maybe social tokens, and to a secondary extent, maybe it's like I own, I have a whole Bitcoin, right? Or I've, this wallet has been active since 2013 or 2015. Those might be the rubrics that we start to identify ourselves around. But I think it's starting to move a little bit away from like the tribal, like Bitcoin and Ethereum maximalists. Those just happen to be like the loudest people with the most at stake, right?
Right.
and
But
the most to
so
lose.
it's interesting. I see both. I see what you're saying. I agree with it. I think both movements are happening at the same time. And the here's why is because I think there's currency created nationalism and there's currency enabled nationalism. And I'm using nationalism in the neutral sense of tribalism, group formation, group identity, etc. Like in this utilization, any group of any size beyond X number of people that has some sense of identity is a sense of nationalism, right? I know it's sort of an abuse of the term, but you could call it tribalism that scales to nationalism. And so currency created nationalism is like, I hold Bitcoin, I hold Ethereum, I hold XRP, whatever, okay? But currency enabled nationalism is something where crypto is just one level of the stack, Web3 is one level of the stack, and you hold an NFT to be part of a club that's trying to do something else, right? So like Vita DAO, for example, or the Bored Ape Yacht Club. I mean, they have probably interests that are beyond. I actually, that's. I have nothing against that whole group or anything. I'm not a member. I wouldn't tell you if I was. I'd be it'd be under a pseudonym or whatever. But the point, while certainly all of them have NFTs in common, while today, because they're an early NFT group, NFTs are going to be a huge part of discussion. No matter what else they have disaligned, they can always bring it back to that topic that they all value. That's super important today because all of the community organizations in America and in much of the Western world have sort of been eroded. There's that book Bowling Alone that I may have mentioned before in the year 2000 that kind of showed how this huge decline in community happened, from 1945 to the year 2000. And now with these Facebook groups and Reddit groups and Twitter this and now these NFT clubs, we're starting to rebuild it group by group on the basis of common interest. So yes, TLDR is I do think that you're going to get both crypto created and crypto enabled nationalism. And the second I think might be healthier because it focuses not simply on coin wars, but on some other purpose. And the coin is just a login. Or the token NFT.
I want to go back. Yeah, so I think those are important definitions. As we think about the national discussions, we're going to ignore Europe, partially because they're asleep right now, and partially because I think the much more interesting area, battleground, and wrote about this at length in the report, is in the U.S. and maybe arguably the luxury that we have because we have states that compete to a certain extent with the federal government. So you have states like Wyoming, states like Texas, Florida, where you can eke out some progress and play a little bit of a ground game, even if the federal government takes a bit more of a hostile turn. You made this comment of comply but don't submit. I want to unpack that a little bit because you also, I think, noted, which I would agree with, that Americans don't really like to emigrate. We do emigrate from state to state. And there are some folks that are starting to emigrate from state to territory, right? We've seen this with Puerto Rico because of the favorable tax benefits. So I think a couple things to unpack here. Are there ways to comply but not submit without emigration? And if so, what are they, right? Because
great question.
That's a pretty extreme statement on its face. Do you have to?
It's not extreme. It's basically in fact I'd call it civil obedience, right? Because you are complying with the law, you are rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar, you are jumping through their checkboxes and so on, but you are doing everything that you can to advocate against it. It is clearly, it's basically like Gandhi's nonviolent resistance, right?
Sure.
It is similar in the sense of recognizing it is unjust, stating it is unjust, nevertheless abiding by it because there's a gun to your head, either directly or indirectly, and conveying to the audience that it is unjust and making the moral case despite being under coercion, right? And so it's like civil disobedience, call it civil obedience, but it is, it is clearly coerced. You're making that clear, right? And so how would you?
If I do run for office, Balaji, I'm going to have the red, white, and blue TBI avatar with "Comply, do not submit" as my campaign slogan.
Yeah, great. That's right.
Because I'm too embedded in the U.S. and suburbia for me to uproot my entire family. So you're talking to me right now, right? What's the game plan?
Yeah. Go back to New York. We talk like this. How you guys doing? I'm from the area. Right? Was that good? That's how I used to talk many, many years ago. That's why I append an R when people ask, why do I append an R to IDEA? That's one relic.
Exactly.
You know, well, we have some
Yep.
ideas because you grew up in the area, you know. Anyway, so, but it's kind of like me busting out Chinese or something. It's an unusual accent. So basically, yeah, I think it's actually, you know, what Antifa would call diversity of tactics, right? You know, diversity of tactics, you know, there's a great book, Beautiful Trouble. I've probably recommended it before, but if you Google diversity of tactics, it's like, oh, well, some people are nonviolent, some people are violent. I don't mean it like that. I mean diversity, which I just think it's funny that they use such a euphemism for that. I think diversity of tactics in this case means some are doing voice, some are doing exit, some are doing a combination thereof. And in that combination, that spread spectrum strategy, we achieve better results than any one by itself, right? For example, you can cook up very simple game theoretic scenarios of like a batter versus a pitcher. Okay, and let's say the pitcher has like 3 kinds of pitches. They have a fastball, they have a slider, and they have like a screwball or something like that. And the batter has also like 3 kinds of swings. And it turns out that depending on your assumptions, you can get like a Nash equilibrium where the optimal strategy is to randomize, right? So you actually are doing all 3 strategies at once. You're superimposing. You're swinging it this way 30% of the time, and this way 40%, and this other way 30% of the time. And that's actually the optimum, rather than putting it all into one strategy. It is the spread spectrum in a sense, you know, not in the sense of like a what's it called, a signal, but you're spreading out your allocation. They call it spread allocation instead. Okay, and so it's good that there's folks like you. It's like, you know, you can argue about what the exact allocation should be, but it is good that there's folks who are fighting in California. It's good there's folks who are fighting in Miami. It's good there's folks who are fighting in New York City and in El Salvador and this and that. We're a genuinely global movement. It's super important. So fighting everywhere is in a sense important. Building everywhere is even more important. However, we also need to sort of just be smart about that. You know, if you're not winning, you retreat tactically on one front and you open up in another. Okay, so let's talk the Intra-America strategy, right? What is the Intra-America strategy? Okay, so the first thing about the Intra-America strategy is to recognize that it is complemented by, and you know, it is not exclusive of the Extra-America strategy. They're complementary tracks, right? There's Mr. Inside, Mr. Outside, Mr. Good Cop, Mr. Bad Cop, whatever you want to think of it as. They're complementary. They're not competitive. You actually, both of them help each other. Just to give a concrete example of that, I've mentioned this before, but Satya Nadella was only able to reform Microsoft in the direction of open source and SaaS and what have you, change their culture, because they had gotten their ass kicked by Google and Apple and so on for the better part of a decade, right? That gave the external evidence that was so undeniable that even Microsoft was forced to reform and could appoint a new leader. So that was a situation where that external example gave an internal example. El Salvador absolutely helps U.S. Bitcoin policy, right? Switzerland, Dubai, Singapore, that absolutely is an example where it shows you'll get left behind, right? So first is they're not in competition, they're in cooperation, number one. Okay. Second is within the U.S., subnational offense, national defense, okay? So at the federal level, assume nothing good can be done. That's to say, just like this is a federal government that, you know, obviously it screwed up everything from the Afghanistan withdrawal to simply mailing people checks. It couldn't, you know, get a COVID vaccine out, but now they're talking about going and attacking, you know, the company. Whereas like, oh, Pfizer and Merck made $8 billion or something. That's like, what is it? 1 day of printing money? It's like the cheapest possible solution to this whole thing, and that they're
in return for cutting down fatalities. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's like,
and yet they're forcing people to get these vaccines.
Yeah, that's right. Like, I don't even know how many trillions of dollars that they printed, but exactly, it's like you know, cuckoo land, right? What I'm referring to is a tweet from like Bernie or whatever the other day that PG retweeted. That was like, you know, seize the drugs. You know what? Moderna is actually investing those proceeds in HIV mRNA, you know, vaccines and things for other, like, that's where you want the capital to go, into innovation, not just thrown in a wood chipper like the rest of what the federal government does, right? That's John Carmack's analogy, by the way, not unique to me. Like, just imagine enormous amounts of money being thrown into a wood chipper, and that's just what the government is. So the federal government basically is, I think, just so many people are focused on it. And it's exactly the wrong thing in some ways to focus on, because A, it's very difficult to change. B, it can only do bad things. And when I say it can only do bad things, can you think of a good thing the federal government has done, like a significant good thing over the last 20 or 30 years? I mean, from the invasion of Iraq to the bailouts to Sarbox to obviously screwing up the Corona response to
ironically,
to Libya.
Yeah, ironically, you could say that the only good thing that they've done in the last 30 years, and it's really getting towards the end of that 30-year limit, is Section 230 and how they were hands off with the early internet. But now it's coming home to roost, right? Now they don't like it.
So what you're arguing is the thing that they did best is what they didn't do.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Right. So, which is,
but they basically codified their own limits, and this is the irony that libertarians don't win elections because they run on the platform of vote for me, I'm going to work less, and people don't really want to hear that when they're trying to elect a leader. They want someone that's going to step up and be strong and say, I'm going to do this, and you're going to get this, and goodies and goodie bags and treats for everybody. When at the end of the day, you have evidence that the only good things that the government has done in the last 30 years are codify their own limitations. And unfortunately, that's only happened a couple of times.
If I'm to be charitable, I can think of, I guess, phone number portability. That was good. That was like a free market thing. That was like mid 2000s. But you kind of have to scrape. You really do have to scrape, right? And
ironically, that's one of the reasons it's so easy for people to get SIM swapped now, because they basically made it easier to port phone numbers, and they said that they're going to penalize the phone companies if they threw up a bunch of roadblocks when people tried to switch their phone numbers.
I'm sure they'd screw that up.
You can't win one way or the other.
The problem is that basically ideology is a poor way to construct policy, because most policies are a set of sliders. And ideology says ram it all the way up to 100% or down to 0%, abolish the police, like that kind of stuff. And reality is, something where two seemingly really opposed partisans might want 45% and 55% of the slider. Like they actually do not differ as much as their rhetoric might lead you to think. If you actually put them in a leadership position, it would be 45-55, right? But coming back, so my kind of one-liner on this, which I think is fun, I think it's funny, is progressives want more government, conservatives want less government, libertarians want no government, technologists want new government. Where rather than more or less or no, you just basically need new folks, and LKY, Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore showed what could happen if you actually had fresh blood and new concepts there. Frankly, Nayib Bukele is pretty impressive recently. I've been impressed. Francis Suarez, I'm impressed. Eric Adams, I'm impressed. Jared Police, I'm impressed. And, it's the last thing that's significant about them. They're all exceptional in their own way, but Jared Police is happens to be gay. Suarez is, of Hispanic descent. Eric Adams is African-American. Nayib Bukele is South American, but of Arab descent. You're seeing actually, quote, these diverse leaders pop up that actually are kind of a fusion, right? Where they are competent and they're innovative, and they also can't be demagogued in the usual way because they have one or more intersectional credentials. And I think that's actually a model so that gets to my second point. So what do we want to do locally, subnationally? So number one is find the next Suarez, find the next Eric Adams, find the next Jared Police, find the next Kristen Sinema, find these folks, right? Who are crucially, by the way, those are Democrats and Republicans, right? Those are centrists. You will find actually it's going to be decentralists versus statists. That's really the axis. Like the guy who killed the amendment, a few months ago, it was Shelby, right, from Alabama, who's like a Republican statist. So there's Democrat and Republican statists, and there's Democrats and Republicans who are pro-freedom. We should not allow it to get boxed into traditional categories, especially because Web3 is showing the possibility for progressive and collective organizing outside the state. If your goal is actually community as opposed to government per se, right? If it is genuine community and sharing of the wealth versus state coercion, then you'd go with Web3, I think, instead. Okay, so the subnational is we want to identify those leaders. We want to back them. We want to back them with money, if possible, but even more importantly, with words, with media. So like it's ridiculously important for everybody watching this. build your own distribution, build your distribution, because media corporations will not speak for you. You have to speak for yourself. And all these censorship resistant tools that we have allow you to speak for yourself, perhaps pseudonymously, so you can get your concepts out without having your person attacked, And you use pseudonymity, crucially, ethically, use it as a shield, not a sword, not to fire on somebody from a concealed position like an anonymous troll, but rather like Satoshi did, where he never trolled anybody, but got these concepts out, right? So one is think local, right? Subnational, states and cities. Two, look for these leaders who are pro-crypto, pro-Bitcoin, pro-Web3. You can identify them because they've tweeted about Bitcoin or they've said something. And actually, remember the thing that we did earlier this year? It's like a small thing, but I think it's a very useful thing, where we had the Bitcoin white paper put up at the Miami.gov and Estonia and so on websites. Remember that? Right.
Well,
That's
it's
a really
a
good
symbol,
place.
right? Because it's and these things are these little things are always so important, because it's like that scene in Pulp Fiction when John Travolta's character, I can't believe I'm blanking on the name, it's like the iconic scene, but he basically says, is it a problem if you say please, or if you ask nicely, when Winston Wolfe is there to like help them like clean up the body? It's like just a little bit, right? Just a little gesture, and I'll get my shit together and I'll believe you, or I'll trust you. There'd be a little bit of goodwill. And if you can't, if it doesn't seem like a big deal to you to actually get it done, then why aren't you doing it? And I think it's the same thing with like the politicians that put like the laser eyes up, or a corporate CEO sending a tweet. These things have ripple effects, and I completely agree with you on the media. The question is, how do we get people and like encourage people to be brave enough to make that stand if they think that there's going to be all these unintended consequences, and they're basically going to insert themselves into like some culture war that one side of the
everybody's
aisle
in a
is
culture war.
going to come down.
Yeah, it's tricky. So
but
short answer
like,
is
are we in an environment like that with crypto already? I guess is the argument, right? Where you're going to be taking flack for if you embrace Bitcoin for ESG reasons, or
right. So short answer,
pseudonymity. Like
right. So basically, you can get the concepts out there. We have the concept now of the pseudonymous economy, where I know it's my coinage, but I think it's being adopted a fair bit, with the idea that this is crucially a moral competitor to the establishment, because it prevents both discrimination and cancellation. Under a pseudonym, right? And especially where it's going to go, AI is going to improve right now we're in an intermediary form where we're using our, real voices and faces, but pretty soon there'll be an AI version of that. Actually, again, Nayib Bukele has, if you see his avatar, it's like a metaverse version of himself. Right? It's like this, he's got like the backwards cap and so on. I love his bio also. It's CEO of El Salvador. Salute. He should change the job title to that, actually, just as another symbolic thing. But coming back to the Bitcoin white paper thing. So essentially, you want to do, the critical thing is, obviously, you've done sales before, like enterprise sales. Right. So, whenever
CEO
you're talking
B2B company, but not officially in that capacity. So, but yes.
Okay, fine. So, in sales, basically, you make a spreadsheet of all your prospects, and then you just go and iterate through them. And the critical mindset change when you go from the government to a government is you go from one federal government to at least 50 state governments plus all the territories, okay, and a bunch of cities, Miami's and San Diego's and what have you, right? And so now you have hundreds of prospects. And, the way I put it is, luck might be having the coin come up heads, but hard work is flipping it 100 times. Yeah. And so you put yourself in the situation to get lucky by basically going down this spreadsheet and finding the folks there who are the equivalent of the Suarez or police or what have you. And this is the strategy that one could apply. Of course, there's others, but actually Messari should probably do this. The jurisdiction report card, right? Where you have, do you know the concept of spatial theory of voting?
I'm not familiar. It's basically you're looking for the candidates that intersect the most on the widest number of issues with you. So you basically rank order like your issues and
Yeah, so the basic concept is ideology can actually be quantified. The political compass is like a sort of a pop culture version of this, with the authoritarian, libertarian axes, or whatever. But ideology can be quantified. And one way to do it is you take a matrix which has n rows down the side of, let's say, 535 politicians or what have you. And then you have k votes across the top, which correspond to, did they vote yes on this bill, no on this bill, abstain, did they abstain, et cetera. So you have this table, this matrix. And then what you can do is you can take that n by k matrix and reduce it to an n by 1, and you get basically a political axis. Or you can get n by 2, and then you get like a political compass and so on, right? So you can actually map people in ideology space. So you look at spatial theory of voting, you can Google that term, and this can be applied to politicians, it can be applied to judges, it can be applied to newspapers and so on and so forth. So if you wanted to be systematic about this, what you do is you define certain similarity metrics. You take those people who are known to be pro Web3, pro Bitcoin, the Jacksonville mayor, the Miami mayor, the NYC mayor, et cetera, and Jared Police and all these other folks within the US that are pro. And then you would you basically form that as a labeled set. And then you have on the other side, your DC swamp creatures who, hate freedom. I know are we exaggerating at all? Like, frankly, it's true, right? They basically want everybody to submit, right? That's why, the term, some will say on Twitter, oh, you bootlicker. The state licker is the ultimate bootlicker, right? Like, so that's a good kind of riposte there, because they're, these people just worship the government implicitly when it's, this blind, deaf, and dumb thing. Again, comply always, but do not submit mentally. So you have these swamp creatures on like the other end. Go ahead. And basically, then you're looking.
Go ahead.
It's like centralized, decentralized. That's the axis that you've got. It's not left, right. Centralized, decentralized. It's upwing versus downwing in a sense, not left wing versus right wing. Okay, so who wants to ascend with technology? Who wants to try to hold it back and repress the future and take people's voice away, take away their private wallets, inflate their currency, blah blah. And then you can kind of have a spectrum, and then you're basically ranking prospects. And you're just going jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And of course, the thing that's interesting, by the way, is once you go from everybody in a door jam trying to lobby the federal government to spreading out and thinking of 50 states, N territories, M cities, just within the US, you have on the order of 100, probably more prospects, certainly multiple hundreds if you include lots of smaller towns. And now it's too much for any one person to do. And so what you want to start doing is starting individual Substacks, media companies, et cetera, that are just writing about, crypto for Poughkeepsie or whatever. You pick a town and you are simply just all in on that. Okay. And a few hundred activists like this that are just focused on the intersection of local with Web3 policy can, I think, over time, get a bunch of effectively sanctuary cities and states for cryptocurrency and blockchain and Web3. Okay. And the reason for that is, go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to just pause here for one second because you've talked a lot about the network state and crypto cities and Eric Adams and Suarez and some of these like hyper local groups that are making some progress. Eric Adams doesn't really matter what he says, quite frankly, because of the bit license. That New York State regulation supersedes anything that you actually want to get done in New York City right now. So the whole state is basically tainted by the bit license and its requirements, which I think are going to have to be rolled back at the state level. Otherwise, it's going to be a hostile city to do business in. Doesn't matter how friendly the mayor is.
How many divisions has the bit license? Here, let me explain what I mean. You're not saying how many divisions has
exactly.
Right. So here's why. Basically, I think we're entering the realm in the next several years of conflict of laws. Okay. But sanctuary cities, there's something that's much stronger than the bit license. There's federal immigration law. Okay. That cities just ignore. They say they're not going to enforce it. There's gun laws that are either more or less strict than the feds. There's abortion laws, obviously, that now differ. There's, for a time, gay marriage laws differed from the feds. There's obviously drug laws, marijuana laws different from the feds. So, the education, there's like 17 states sued the federal government over this like math is white supremacist stuff where, or where they're sending federal agents to school board meetings. And so the divergence between states and cities and the feds is so wide, right? That, there's also something, as you're probably aware, called prosecutorial discretion. There are many laws on the books that there's simply the decision to not enforce them. Okay. For example, laws against like miscegenation or adultery or whatever, stuff like that was on the books for a long time. Some of it's often still on the books, but it's just not enforced, right? And there was a decision to not enforce it. And this is, by the way, I was talking about this on Twitter the other day, like rebranding versus reinterpretation. Rebranding keeps the symbols, or rather it changes the symbols but keeps the substance. It was Facebook, it's now Meta, but it's the same company basically, but you're just changing some of the brand perception around it maybe, if it's successful. And reinterpretation is the opposite. It keeps the symbol but changes the substance, of which the most obvious example is, recent example might be China, where it went from Maoism to capitalism, right? But it kept the same hammer and sickle symbol and still calls themselves communist, right? Now they're morphing yet again with reinterpretation. And so reinterpretation is super powerful. Like don't want to be overly legalist. If a city or a state can defy the feds on immigration law, it can absolutely defy them on anything else. It's something where the question is whether they have the will to do it, whether they have the political support to do it, to do non-enforcement. Because what are they going to do? Like send in, federal stormtroopers to basically kick in the door and say, put the wallets on the table or something. I mean, they could. It might actually get to that. I mean, Gorbachev in the waning days of the Soviet Empire did go and raid the Vilnius Tower and so on. So they could. I'm not saying they couldn't. But
my point
by
is,
doing that,
they're
delegitimating. Go ahead.
Yeah. Do you need actual states though, right? And this might be splitting hairs a little bit, so I'm not trying to meander too far from the point. But
sure.
My point is, New York State Attorney General, can basically neuter New York City and what the mayor of 8 million people and one of the largest economies in the world, if it were a city state.
Well, so that's why we get to conflict of laws, right? In the end of the Soviet Union, there was a coup.
Well, that's white collar crime, though, right? It's not. Some of the other examples that you mentioned were much more physical, right? Enforcing drug laws, immigration.
Drug laws, basically. Well, let's take drug laws, right? Let's take it out of the context of crypto. There are, businesses that are started that are like raising VC, that are selling, marijuana stuff, that you would call, quote, a white collar crime, I guess, because it's in violation, arguably, of federal law. It's certainly in a gray zone. But they exist, and that's certainly the arrow of history now at the current moment, right? Go ahead. I think it's a good analogy.
It's a fair counterpoint. I guess my bigger point is, and marijuana law is actually a good example because, yes, you had sanctuary cities, but they've been legalized or decriminalized or allowed for medicinal purposes on a state-by-state basis, as far as I know. So that's I think where you get the real kind of ground game wins, is if you can get Florida and Wyoming and Colorado and Texas to not just have like sanctuary cities, right, but to basically have the whole state and its borders protecting crypto and creating state level conflicts versus
absolutely.
national.
Absolutely. So first of all, I totally agree. What I'm saying is it's similar to my point earlier where the international and the subnational complement each other, right? So what we're talking about is the formal and the informal government. And you can kind of have a 2x2. Is it formally on the books? Is it informally on the books? Is it like formally enforced? Is it informally enforced? And, for example, cancellation is like an informal law that is like informally enforced. And so that's why people can deny it, right? And then you have like formal laws that are formally enforced. And so you can kind of think of that as a 2x2, okay? And of course, is it better when the law is clear and it's formally enforced and so on? Should we advocate for that? Absolutely. But if you go and read Beautiful Trouble, by the way, and take a look at that. And the thing is that in the medium term, you identify something important, which is true, namely that when the markets are down, these folks are going to try to use it to demagogue cryptocurrency. For those folks who are short-term oriented and just buying the latest, whatever coin, then they're going to like, oh my God, why would somebody allow me to lose money? This kind of stupid sort of thing. That will happen, right? want to be adults when they're winning, but they want someone to take their losses when they're losing, whatever. Okay, I was scammed, fraud. Okay, fine. However, there's a countervailing trend that's very important, which is inflation. And that's the state versus the people on the different dimension, where now it's very hard. The other day, Warren tried to blame inflation on like big companies. But the thing is that there's enough people who recognize that it's only the government that's printing the money, like it's not the companies this time, that it's hard for them to do their normal tactics on this one. So that's kind of a countervailing trend that I think is pretty certain, where it's harder for them to pit 50% versus the other 50%. It is basically the 99% of the population versus the 1%, which is the federal government, about 3 million. That's a different 99% and 1%, right? It's about 3 million federal employees. That's a 1%. Oh, about that. And they're trillionaires. They're not even billionaires because they're printing all the money. Yeah. So my point on this, just to give you another kind of historical snippet, how I think about this, in the waning days of the Soviet Union, these hardline communists, which the Times at the time called hardline conservatives, because they flipped it around, turned the communists into conservatives. There was a truth to that, and they were trying to preserve the regime. But these hardline communists, they launched a coup attempt against Gorbachev. They put him under house arrest, and they tried to roll in the tanks and say, hey, we're going to hard communism now, not this perestroika, glasnost type stuff, and which was free markets and free speech, basically, or freer markets and freer speech. And what happened was, the critical moment was that in Moscow, like, the tanks did not fire on Yeltsin and his guys. Okay, so insofar as those hardline communists had given the order, some I think were generals, insofar as they had given the order to their troops, there was a principal agent disalignment where the soldier had different software in their head than the general did. They had gotten enough blue jeans, right? They had gotten enough rock and roll. They had gotten enough Radio Free Europe that the software in their head was different, and it wasn't a fully unified like trigger lock. It wasn't like this general can just script a drone to go and shoot people. Okay, so there's a gap between the security forces that would actually go and enforce the law and these hardline communists that wanted to try to run this coup, right? And of course, it was a time of who do you side with, the guy who's running the mayor of Russia or of Moscow? I think I forget where Yeltsin was at the time. He was in some official position. I think he was like mayor of Moscow or something. I forget. But do you side with Yeltsin or you side with the other guy? And in that time, with when you have a conflict of laws, they had to just sort of think about who they were sympathetic to, and that was on balance blue jeans and rock and roll. Okay, so when you talk about NYC, or you talk about one of these other contexts, and I don't know every detail of NYC politics and what is permissible or what have you, but where there's a will, there's a way. And if you just went from abolish the police to a head of police who's pro cryptocurrency, I mean, the obvious thing, we should have done this a long time ago, but we should be basically going and doing all kinds of policemen's benevolent union things, handing out $100 in BTC to everybody there. Coinbase just did something like this, and I was kind of, helping a little bit with this, with like the Veterans Day thing. We need to do way more of this, because the fundamental thing is that if you can just, the state is giving people nothing. If you can outbid the state, they're taking away their money with inflation, right? If you can outbid the state effectively, if you can give money to local governments with city coins, if you can give actual sovereignty to El Salvador via Bitcoin, if you can bring business to Wyoming with DAOs, if you can outbid the state, the federal government, which is not that hard to do because it's so incompetent, then you can get something where you can align the local populace. Okay, so that's kind of a third axis there, like kind of alignment. Let me come back to media, because I cannot stress how.
I was going to go the same direction, because this comes back to your moral stack, right? Because if you're talking about winning hearts and minds, and you're basically playing different jurisdictions off of each other, you're basically having people vote with their feet, but not necessarily emigrate from the country, right? So are you going to move from New York City to Jersey City because of the bit license? Maybe. There are crypto companies
a lot of people did, right?
Are you going to commute like over the border, right, the state border, if you need medicinal marijuana, or if you just want it recreationally and then kind of bring it back home? So we already have like little examples of this. I think The difference between the example he gave about Russian soldiers, which is maybe a perfect one in some respects because it shows the contrast of where we are today, and again, it ties back to media. The early folks, it does feel like if crypto becomes politicized and becomes like a red or blue issue, generationally,
I think it's going to be orange and green, by the way. Go ahead.
There's a lot of but my point is there's a lot of consistencies between Elizabeth Warren, who's in her 70s, and some of the early young voters that are woke progressives in their 20s that are like pro Warren, pro Bernie, and basically will look at some of their statements uncritically, and the same is true for the other side of the aisle, right? So if that's you mentioned some of the tweets that Warren had about inflation and the classic like CNN clip of like, oh, this billionaire could give $1 million to every American and still have some left over, with just basic math errors that goes basically unchecked. My fear is we are entering an environment where if there's no one to push back and there's like no one to call balls and strikes in the media, then that seems like the biggest attack vector that we have, because media and governments are the most distrusted and least competent institutions that we have right now in terms of public perception. And yet those are probably the two groups that are going to be calling balls and strikes for crypto and for this entire like emerging ecosystem for the next couple of years, unless something major changes. So going back to media, like how do we fix that problem? Because it's tough to win hearts and minds if the mainstream media doesn't pick it up, and then social media ends up censoring it or deplatforming you.
So all right. So a few things on this. It's a very important topic. So basically, the mainstream media. So first, let's deconstruct, then let's construct. Okay. Short answer is watch my Chainlink talk on the Ledger of Record, and actually we're starting to actually ship some of that stuff where AP is putting thousands of things on chain using Chainlink. So they're starting to constrain themselves and making it harder to rewrite history, easier to programmatically prove things, baby steps, but the Ledger of Record is happening. So that is the medium-term solution for this. So watch my talk on that. Okay, that's a quick answer. Longer answer. Longer answer is that I think the counter decentralization will win in China, but it will lose in the US. The reason is that China just sort of took the hit of setting up censorship. And, they took the hit of firing on the crowd with Tiananmen. They took the hit basically of essentially taking this massive PR hit globally for the CCP to just retain brute power at all costs. But in the US, they are conflicted because they're trying to retrofit a censorship apparatus onto a previously relatively free society. So when they publish these articles, and I actually, I don't know if you saw my tweet on this the other day, where, the thing about how like free speech is killing us and so on. They were going after this. Hold on, let me see if I can find this.
There's a lot of crazy stuff. So
there's a lot of.
I subscribe to your tweets though, because 99% of the time I agree with them.
Okay, well, here we go. So, and I love yours as well. But here's this. For example, I was pasting it into the channel. They both want an end to free speech. China accomplishes this through centralized state censorship, while woke's work around the First Amendment through a decentralized corporate censorship regime, right? So internet speech will never go back to normal, okay? In the debate over freedom versus control of the global network, China was largely correct and the US is wrong in the Atlantic, okay? Or free speech is killing us in Sulzberger's paper, or free speech will save our democracy disputed by third party. All this type of stuff. I'm just giving 3 examples, but this is very typical stuff, unfortunately, right? And the point about all this is it actually shows weakness. The reason it shows weakness is it's a rearguard attack where they are throwing whatever purported ethics they had overboard in just a brute attempt to kind of jam this genie back in the bottle, censor the internet, retain power, get these interlopers to get their stuff back in the garage, and kind of return to the halcyon era of like 2007 or whenever it was before print media crashed, right? Mm-hmm. And the issue is that they simply aren't smart or ruthless enough to to do this, right? That like the level of censorship you would need is a China level censorship, and that means you'd actually need to know the level of engineering the Chinese government, is capable of, and you'd have to be insanely ruthless like they are. And fortunately, these guys are chaotic evil rather than lawful evil, so they're not like capable of doing as much speech suppression. So that's a saving grace, And do you know what I mean by chaotic evil versus lawful evil?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You can probably guess, right?
3x3 matrix.
Yeah, it's 3x3. That's right.
I just stay on the chaotic spectrum, and I
yes, chaotic
depending
neutral,
on who you're talking to between chaotic evil and chaotic good. So
right. So the thing is, against chaotic evil, simply being persistent helps a great deal, because they're mean, but they're reactive. Now, here's the thing: you mentioned that their trust is really low. Yes, is true. However, their number one weapon is antitrust in a different sense than it's normally meant. That is to say, their number one weapon is to try to knock down trust in someone else, right? Cancellation. So they themselves are nasty and untrusted, and masks don't work before they do. They contradict themselves constantly. But what they're optimized for is knocking down other potential sources of truth, right? There shall be no other govs before me. Because if you have the monopoly of truth, that's upstream the monopoly of violence. The obvious example is if you say that there's WMDs in Iraq, you invade Iraq. There's many smaller examples, which is, if you can say someone is guilty of this crime with monopoly of truth, well, then you can greenlight the use of police forces or whatever against them, right? These guys, these crypto guys are not doing something above board, then you greenlight the use of the regulatory state against them, right? So monopoly of truth is upstream of a lot, and they're optimized for taking down alternatives to monopoly of truth until Bitcoin, until cryptocurrency, until decentralized truth, until decentralized cryptographic truth, which is set up to be stronger than them. And they don't really understand this yet. The Truth Machine is a good book on this, but this is why, there's all kinds of weakness in the current state. You mentioned that their popularity is down, that that they're untrusted. It's also something, by the way, where their best have defected, right? Every Glenn Greenwald and Barry Weiss and Jesse Signal and Matt Iglesias that goes to Substack it's not simply a -1 for them, but a +1 for us. It's like a +10 for us, right? Because their best and smartest people are leaving. And it's not so much that they're all, quote, I don't agree with everything all of those folks say. I'm sure they disagree with many of the things I say. But fundamentally, in Substack, you can see the person, right? They are speaking for themselves. They're not aggregated and diluted into this faceless institution that, tries to speak in the passive voice as if, it is the truth and this disembodied truth. The Wizard of Oz, the curtain is down, it's a person, and that individual is more trusted in the institution. So the thing, by the way, also about media, that you knew this probably, but it just took me a while to kind of register this. Just like some companies will have like a star engineer, and that star engineer is sort of difficult to replace by hiring or what have you. A good chunk of these outlets had like a star writer who really carried the whole thing. The obvious example is like The Intercept with Greenwald, okay? But there's others that are less obvious. And when those folks, like Nate Silver going and doing his own thing, right? When those folks go to Substack, it's a huge blow for those organizations, more than is perceptible externally. And that's why you start to hear them all basically saying the same gibberish. If you trained an ML model, would it really be able to tell the difference between Vice and Vox and BuzzFeed and NYT and WSJ nowadays? If you strip the signals over there, could you actually tell the difference in a classifier? I think that's an empirical question, because they all sound the same. That's their safe space now, is because they all repeat what others are saying. Then they can't get canceled, because it's like the school of fish strategy. They all kind of shift at the same time. The lab leak was a racist conspiracy theory, and now it's actually potentially true. But they never actually admit that they were wrong, or they tried to cancel people on it, or look at the facts or the numbers, which is actually what matters. They just try to move in a group at the same time. That groupthink, losing their best people, though, it means groupthink is not thinking. So they're fundamentally weak. They lack cognition. They can only react like sort of a wild animal, like a chaotic evil animal. So long as you don't present a particular kind of teed up stimulus for them, it's difficult for them to attack. Okay. So just to recap a few things. First, their trust is down. They're optimized for attacking others' trust. So we go to decentralized truth and pseudonymity. Second, they're losing their best people. We should be funding more and more independent media. And crucially, very importantly, not simply, and this is where I think, and nothing against it, you're thinking American and I'm thinking international, and there's a complement, okay? But we must fund so-called, diverse influencers, pseudonymous influencers around the globe. I want much more Satoniers. I want much more Antonio Martinez, even though he's in the US. I want much more of Indian influencers, Nigerian influencers. This guy, SK Rude, has a great blog in Nigeria on the Nigerian tech scene. I want South Americans. I want Eastern Europeans. I want Japanese people writing in translation. I want to hear from the rest of the world because it's a genuinely global movement. And those people can write in English, and we take them, and they're no longer wallflowers or mere spectators. They are in the game as equals, and we lend a hand to them as equals, because that's what that modern media environment is going to look like. It's not going to be something that's concentrated in 5 blocks of Radio City Music Hall. It's going to be something. It's not like Brooklyn's wokest. It's the people of the world, right? So that is another very important aspect, is the global, especially the global Anglosphere. Okay, really everybody, but the global Anglosphere is a massive, massive, massive group of folks which can write. They can speak, they can talk, and many of them understand tech in a very different way because they've been ascending with tech rather than descending with it, right? Rather than the first world and the third world, or like the rich versus the poor. I think it's better to think about it in terms of the ascending class versus the descending class. These people might be poor, but they're ascending. These Brooklyn wokes might be rich, but they're descending. And so we shouldn't spend all of our, even the term mainstream media, I think a better way of putting it is American media, New York media, centralized media, and especially old media, right? And we would instead, there's another aspect of this. So I mentioned A, that that they're losing trust. We go to decentralized truth. B, that they're losing their best folks. C, go global. D, very important, maybe obvious, creator incentives. Mirror.xyz, right? Which I put a little money into early on. And Rally and all of these things for creators. Any one experiment may or may not work, but collectively, creator monetization via NFTs, via crypto Substacks, via like stuff like if Rumble eventually cryptoifies, there's a crypto video startup that's actually doing fairly well. Gosh, I'm just forgetting the name of it. And basically the thing about it is that we, even for somebody who's totally neutral, right, we can sort of outbid them, and we can basically go and put in more money, right? And we can essentially have something where, for somebody who's totally neutral, they just make more money as a creator in crypto from internet influencers to crypto creators, right? And the point about this is it's a combined arms attack. I'm not saying that there's any one thing that's going to work, okay? But it's this combined arms attack is something where we reject the establishment as untrue. We recognize that it's going to attack you, so we go pseudonymous. We build better tools for creators to monetize. We recruit from overseas. We also recruit out their best. And then most importantly, that very first thing I talked about, where we have a better moral stack. Okay, let me pause there.
Is crypto or are crypto incentives almost like a vampire attack used by the intellectual dark web to take it from like the dark web into like mainstream media? I'm being kind of serious, right? You think about like all these iconoclastic journalists that you just mentioned that are now on Substack. Well, Substack is like step one, but ultimately, if that platform is not safe, or if you really want to hyper monetize it and scale it and give kind of users incentives to come over there along with the creators, is that the path forward? And do we think that we'll see that in the next couple of years? Because I don't know about you. I mean, you.
I was thinking about LBRY.io, library.io.
LBRY, yeah.
Video crypto protocol. Go ahead.
You've been on the mark with your with your tweets. I don't necessarily know if you're someone that would be like a target for deplatforming, right? But there are others that are more aggressive, or that might trip over the line once.
That'd be extremely painful for them. No, I'm just.
Exactly. No, but I think that is top of mind this week more so than it was last week with Jack at the helm, if that makes sense.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So like,
no, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess the question is like, where are we in the evolution of crypto-enabled media and crypto-enabled truth, and like this kind of component of Web3, which I think we've all agreed is going to be interesting and useful and probably the future for all the reasons that we've kind of outlined. But sequentially, like, is this something that could actually break out in the near term, or could it be catalyzed?
Yeah. So
by
here's the
some
issue.
externalities around like the political conversation of crypto in general.
Yeah. So I think the major issue is going to be on-chain stats that prove that inflation is happening, and they give shadow stats that show what the true value of the dollar is. Even just USD BTC is pretty good, by the way. Actually, Thiel had a similar observation a little while ago where he's like, that's the least faked price in the world in some ways. And it's funny because it's true, because even given whatever Tether hijinks, et cetera, nothing compares to the degree of manipulation of the dollar itself. You know, it's like this giant pile of trillions of dollars over here, and then, you know, a little pile of puddle on the other side. So I think that let's talk about the inflation conversation for a second. I had this, prize. We're looking at some of the submissions. We may do it in a different way where we like recruit for it. But if you go to 17tran.com/inflation, there's a long post on inflation there. And essentially the concept is that this is going to be what delegitimates them, I think, because it's experienced by everybody. And that's really important. You know the concept of gel-man amnesia?
Yeah, it's basically you'll read one article and say, on a subject matter that and you say this is complete garbage, and then you'll read the exact same paper, the next article, and then all of a sudden it magically
you forget
is written by an expert, right? Yeah, and you forget that it's the same blind leading the blind that's populating the entire paper.
That's right. So let me give here's a mechanistic explanation for why that happens. Okay, so visualize NYT and centralized media as a hub. Okay. And then here's a spoke coming off, and this is, let's say, Bitcoin. And then there's another one that's like India. And here's another one that's like Japan or Iraq or whatever, right? These various spokes. And if you are an expert on Bitcoin, you have better local information on that topic in like the Hayekian sense, but not simply about transactions, just other things, events that are happening. And so you have a better source of information than this centralized hub. And so you know that what they're saying is false about this topic, or it's misleading. But then when you go and read about, India or Japan or Iraq or Hollywood or what have you, you're not in that spoke, right? So you don't have local information there. You're relying on the hub, which is like a hall of mirrors that's giving you a noisy reflection of what's happening in Japan or what's happening in India. Okay. It's reflecting back to you something that's false, but you don't have a direct peer-to-peer connection with India, with Japan, with Hollywood to get better information. So it's fundamentally, we call it the media because it mediates our experience of reality. It is fundamentally their mediating, hub, centralizing kind of role that has led to their monopoly over the conversation. This is why they're so intent on canceling people and trying to shame people and saying you shouldn't talk to this or that, because reflexively they have developed a series of adaptations for maintaining their central position in this information landscape. So what we're doing is we're establishing an alternate hub of effectively around Nakamoto consensus, right, which is more powerful than their hub, among other things, because it also makes more money than their hub, but it's more global, it's more international, it's more mathematical, more programmable. And with Merkle trees, you can hash almost anything basically anything into the Bitcoin blockchain. And so that's a more powerful model of truth, decentralized truth, than their corporate truth. So we now have an alternate hub to start organizing around. Now, what was my point? Why did I bring this up? With gel-man amnesia, it only works if lots of people are isolated and their information about another spoke is coming through the centralized thing. The bigger the issue and the larger the percentage of people that are influenced, and the more that they can see that the centralized hub is lying about them, it's one thing to take on 1% at a time and lie about them, or 0.1% or 0.01% or one individual. It's another thing to lie about 10, 20, 30, 50% of the population. And it's yet another thing to lie to 99% of the population about whether inflation is happening. Right. So they're going to be caught between a rock and a hard place where, do you remember the Iraqi information minister?
No.
From the invasion of Iraq, there was a guy who was a regime, loyalist, and he was on TV and he's like, we will burn the Americans in their tanks. And this was like happening as like special forces were like coming through his window or something like that. Right. So what was on screen was at like a total, like just disalignment with the reality of the situation. So these media corporations in the age of inflation, because it's not just one person experiencing inflation or a small spoke over here, it's all the spokes together, and they'd have an alternate hub of shadow inflation stats, right? when that is happening and you're looking at the equivalent of coin market cap, but for inflation versus the, move along, nothing to see here, nothing is happening, it's transitory, okay, it's permanent, okay, it's actually good, it's wiping out debts, okay, we're going to try to seize all the Bitcoin. Like that progression will happen, unfortunately, I think. And so that is going to be, I think, the big delegitimator, because people don't have global information about what's going on in Japan or Afghanistan or something like that, but they do have local information about their own pocket. And when the regime is constantly lying to them about that, it basically collapses them. That's how I think the crisis of confidence will happen in the 2020s. Let me pause there.
I agree with pretty much everything that you just said. The one thing that I come back to, and there's so many different threads to pull on, but the one that I want to come back to is, you talk a lot about pseudonymous reputation, pseudonymous truth, and speech being important. And I wonder two things, right? Like, we don't want to be forced into pseudonymity necessarily, but is the suggestion almost that like the metaverse is the final frontier and like the final emigration point for people to escape a state that they really don't want to be subject to? So I will.
It's not the final, but it's an intermediate.
I will comply in the physical realm, but I will not submit. So I'm spending more of my time. I'm moving more of my commerce. I'm moving more of my reputation into the metaverse or some online community that ultimately becomes the metaverse as the hardware gets better. Is that the choice? Because I think some people look at that as dystopian, like, no, let's win the physical realm and let's win the hearts and minds. And like, how do we do that, right? Like, how do we win America? In some respects, you're kind of defaulting to the old model of like, we must beat them at the ballot box and kind of win the political game versus just throw your hands up and say, playing a new game. And now it's virtual.
Yeah. So it's a great question. And the thing is, so I'm about to say, I don't think it's like super subtle, but it is two steps. And so, people often will only just pay attention to like the first sentence, but maybe not you, but one might, somebody might. Mm-hmm. And what that is basically it is win online to win offline. Yep. Okay. You cannot win directly in a head-on attack against a fortified stronghold. What you can do is go kitty corner like diagonal. You can go diagonal, build up resources in an area that the establishment doesn't understand or doesn't value or doesn't have the technical skill. And then, you have your freedom over here. And then if you so choose, come back like a comet. Mm-hmm. Okay, come back with resources, come back with 1,000 ships. Okay. And that's like, just to give some examples. Okay. The Puritans and so everybody left persecution of Europe. They came to the New World. They had their own internal fights and so on over there, but it was easier to win independence in the New World than the Old World because, these guys lived here, the American, like early Americans lived here, and the British had to project power overseas, and it just wasn't as important to them as other things were, right? Getting those ships across the Atlantic versus fighting a bunch of folks that were living off the land, that's actually a significant disadvantage, okay? Had it been next door, it might have been harder. So that's like an example of, kind of going diagonal. And then the resources that were built up in America eventually led to becoming ridiculously powerful. And they could come back into Europe with, after World War II and what have you. And certainly it exported democracy and capitalism, all these other things. It won on many different levels because it established its freedom in a new area. It built up over there. It didn't fight constantly with the old world during time. It built up over there. And then it was able to eventually gain enough strength that should it choose, it could take on the old world should it need to. Another example with Google, this is early Google, not today's monstrosity, okay, but early Google, admirable Google, Larry Page Google, it didn't compete with Microsoft head on at the time. It just did search. They totally monitored. I mean, it was insane levels of focus on just search. When everybody else was doing portals, e-commerce, all this stuff for 6 years, from 98 to 2004, all they did was search, okay? Because search is a very technically difficult problem. It's a very hard problem. And it's still a hard problem. They suck at it now, I think. I mean, in relative terms, their quality has been declining. There's an opportunity there, actually, in crypto. I can come back to that. But early Google was amazingly disciplined, amazingly focused, amazingly good at execution. And then after they totally won in search and they got billions of dollars in this IPO and so on, then they came back with Google Docs and Sheets and Slides to compete with Microsoft. Okay. And they came back with Android, which was, it wasn't Linux on the desktop. It was Linux on the next desktop to compete with Microsoft, and in fact defeat Microsoft. Windows Phone isn't even in the game, and so this concept of, go diagonal, right? Go to like a geography and a market that the establishment can't touch, okay? And be as far away from them as possible, that they don't care about it. It's a brackish field. It's like the equivalent of the Burning Man, terrain where, the most valuable territory is the territory the establishment values least, because they won't fight for it, or won't fight for it that much. They don't really care. Go and do your stupid Bitcoin stuff, tech bro, right? That's what you actually want them to say. Okay. And that's what they said for many years. And we could compound and build strength in something that they didn't understand, because they can't understand it, by the way. They don't think like angel investors. They don't think like technologists. They're not capable of looking at a spectrum of 1,000 things that are at 0.0001% traction and evaluating rationally as to which one of those could grow to 30%. They have a form of nearsightedness where they can only see movements that are already at 10, 20, 30%. It's like a majoritarian blindness, a form of nearsightedness, right? So because once you actually do start thinking about all the things that could come up, you have to have a totally different mental model. You need to have filters. You need to be filtering like an angel investor and so on. It's not their mindset. That's why they're constantly caught by surprise. Afghanistan's a surprise, and COVID's a surprise, and the bailouts are a surprise. Everything's a surprise. And when it's a surprise, they're paying up, right? They're paying the equivalent of a Series G round. They're printing $1 trillion for something that you might have been able to fix with $1 million. And the more and more they do that, the worse and worse they are as capital allocators. If you're a terrible capital allocator, it doesn't matter how much money you were born with, you will become poor. San Francisco can have $13 billion a year, but it spends $300 million in a bus lane. It will become poor, right? Saying shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. So where was I? I lost my train of thought. You poked on something.
No, I think, we've covered a lot on like the political side of things, and how we think about the state versus federal, how we think about like the regulatory landscape evolving, what is going to take to win, decentralized media, kind of decentralized truth's role in that, and I think in summarizing your last comment, it's really about picking your battles, right? And it's like the startup, like find the MVP that gives you a wedge into a market, and then kind of build around
kitty corner.
Wedge,
okay, sorry.
right?
Now I remember what you said. Okay, so you were asking, Balaji, is your prescription for us to just retreat to online and give up offline? No, it's like a digital Dunkirk. Okay, so it is a tactical evacuation to an area where we are strong. Okay, we can win in the digital space. We understand that. We know how to code. We know how to build technology companies. We have friends internationally. We are strong in this realm, right? We understand it in a deep way. We spent our careers here, and it's also ramping. It was nothing 10 years ago. It's $1 trillion something. It'll be $100 trillion in the future. So digital Dunkirk, okay, and from there we fight, if we eventually. But we basically compound strength, minimum amount of fighting, build as many alliances as we can with the local mayors, the international cities, and so on. Have enough a network of things around the world, and in some ways, okay, if you're strong enough, you have strong enough defenses. There's this Chinese proverb which is like, if you stand by the river long enough, you shall watch the bodies of your enemies float by. Okay, and what that kind of means actually is an interesting kind of thing, which is you don't like these folks are so fratricidal, they're so insane. These the woke on woke violence will, like, basically sometimes the literal sense, will devour them if you just let them just tear each other's heads off, and we just kind of stay strong in our own jurisdiction, both like in the virtual sense and in a physical sense of like a Miami, right? Let these wokes go and do what Freddie DeBoer actually talks about, which is this declining class, claw each other's eyeballs out. Like that's what they're good at, right? But block them, right? Build our own thing. And eventually, not only will their internal kind of stuff, cause them to fall, not only are their best leaving, we're building something that's even better, right? We're building the ledger of record. We're building these other economies. We're making alliances with folks locally. And so it might just like rot and collapse on its own. Do you know what like Maxwell's demon is? It's like basically, if you have 2 chambers, you have hot particles. You can imagine a little demon that opens a door and just lets them in over here and closes it to others, right? In a sense, that's like what Miami is. That's what cryptocurrency is. Anybody with any ambition or talent or innovativeness
or free thinking spirit and so on, seeks this door and it comes over here, right? And so essentially we become warmer and stronger, and they're like cooler over here, not cooler in the sense of cool, but like less relevant, right? Mm-hmm. And so that I think is the answer. It is it's basically not being dumb enough to fight head on these guys when they're strong, but not being I would say pessimistic enough, like not being naive enough or impractical enough to think that digital alone is enough. Okay, so you can't beat them. We won't join them, but we can leave them and build strength and eventually beat them, outlast them. There's different ways of winning. They might just like blow themselves up. Okay, so that's how I think about it.
So we have about 10 minutes until the top of the hour here. Do you have flexibility to go a little bit longer, or should we start wrapping up?
Let's start wrapping up, actually, if you don't mind.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So it's kind of late here on the East Coast, so I'm borderline relieved, but I know people are going to enjoy this. So I think justifiably spent a lot of time on the two institutions that are the least competent and least trusted, and that like 4-quadrant graphic, right? Like businesses,
like
media,
like
they're probably in the poor quadrant. I would argue that crypto is maybe the only institution right now, or neutral tech, that could be in the top quadrant. So not big tech like the monopolies, but like email. Right?
Technology, not the
like
tech
peer-to-peer
industry.
messaging, the technological protocols, right? And so I don't think that trend is ever going to reverse, because the people that already believe that to be true are young people, and the people that have any confidence whatsoever in like the legacy institutions they're literally going to die off. So I think it was worth us spending a ton of time on what I think is going to be the biggest theme for next year, which is we're too big to hide. How do you actually strategically defend yourself, comply but not submit, and then how do you kind of eke out victories city by city, person by person, convert by convert, and then ultimately like state by state, and get to the policy that you want to.
One thing I think we should do.
Go ahead, add to that.
One thing I think we need to do is model legislation. For example, an anti-Bitcoin seizure bill. So anticipating that something like that will come down the pike at some point. Places, all of these cities and states, we should draft something. And the thing is, you have to define carefully what a seizure is. If it's there's a lot of ways to do something which isn't just as optically obvious as a seizure. It could be something which is like an insane wealth tax or something like that, right? But basically, they're going to try something, I think, like Executive Order 6102 at some point. The difference is that entering the century, the centralized state won, and now we're in the kind of the decentralizing phase, and all the same battles are occurring, but with the opposite outcome. Like where you might think about this, right? How history kind of has a mirror moment in 1950, and like you decentralize going this way and centralize, or it's decentralizing in both directions, right? But Executive Order 6102 is successful. Whatever their new version is, I think, is going to fail. But we should anticipate that, get ahead of that, write model legislation, have it adopted by cities and states, think about what vectors a seizure would look like, and basically say, no, these are sanctuary cities for cryptocurrency, sanctuary cities for blockchain technology. We're going to have a Bitcoin-backed local, city or state, reserve, just like they've got the National Guard, they have that reserve. And I think that's an important part of the plan. And, I don't have the bandwidth to work on all this stuff, but I think that's one piece of it. And similarly, overseas, you should advocate for, the key is, when I see model legislation, by the way, if we don't write the laws, others will write them for us. Okay, like that's to say, laws don't, who writes these laws? Goldman writes these laws. Yeah, they don't magically come. Goldman and Morgan, like these guys, the banks write these laws, or in some cases, these, the Very Stable Genius Act, the Stablecoin Act, which tries to name PayPal as a stablecoin. That's written by some rando academic that wants to exert power over you and me and hundreds of millions of people around the world, simply because they essentially want to use the U.S. empire as like this club. And so, if we leave it to those folks, okay, who are not aligned, who do not want individuals to be able to speak freely, trade freely, then we will get a bad outcome. So we cannot be like the naive libertarian who's like, oh, just leave me alone, government or whatever. That would be great. But really, we need a better vision for what the state should and should not be doing and propose that legislation and get support behind it. And crucially, not be naive enough to think we can win at the federal level to win subnationally and internationally, to set precedents and work our way from the periphery into the core. This is actually like Ibn Khaldun and Asabia and the Marcher Lords. Are you familiar with that whole thing?
Mm-mm.
So basically,
but I'm afraid that we're going to go into another history lesson that's going to eat up the last 5 minutes of time. So we're going to save that for the footnotes. Yeah, Google it. Yeah, go ahead.
Footnote 30-second version is basically that the successor to a decaying empire is not usually like a total barbarian, nor is it somebody from the capital. It's the so-called Marcher Lord with sort of 1 foot in between, civilization and barbarism, or civilization and the frontier. So they know what being civilized is, but they also themselves aren't so civilized as to be like an effete creature out of the Hunger Games. They actually know what it is to tame nature, And so that's just a mental model of, you go from the periphery rather than the core. The core is too rich and contented and privileged and what have you to actually ever take a risk on anything. But the periphery is not. That's why El Salvador, is taking a risk. And I think you work your way from the outside in. So.
Yeah. So this is actually kind of perfect place to end, because Aram Salute asked in the comments, when network state constitution? And it's funny because I was actually going to ask the same thing, right? You have these corporate-backed groups that are trade associations where you're going to have 100 people in the room, and 20 of them are going to be lawyers, and 20 of them are going to be policy experts, and 20 of them are going to be, like the product people trying to translate, and then 20 are going to be the CEOs. That sounds like a nightmare to actually get anybody to agree on anything of real substance. And I know people are working hard on that. Can we create like a decentralized constitution and like set of legislative proposals, in GitHub or through some other medium that you think could actually be crowd written, and we could triangulate on something that would be like, what is sane policy in a given jurisdiction? Like how would you incentivize people to go about that, and who does the work, I guess? Who proposes it? Great
question. So I think that, look, obviously I'm in favor of code. I'm in favor of, constitutions and so on. But I think that what kind of comes first is content and community. Mm-hmm. Like laws and written laws and things like that should be just an encoding of our intuitions as a community. Things that we already have consensus on. Right. And so there's kind of a modern, I'm not saying this in a critical way, but just like it's a kind of a frame to break out of. There's a modern Western mindset, which is that it's all about laws and lawyers and legalisms and so on and so forth. And what's funny is people are pounding the law harder and harder as community is less and less, because the law is fundamentally a dispute resolution mechanism. Even democracy and capitalism are, in a sense, as much as I'm a capitalist, these are dispute resolution mechanisms. You have a lawsuit, you have a court case, or you have a vote, you have even a market. It's like, I want this resource, you want this resource, who gets it? Okay, it's price allocation. I want this outcome, you want this allocation outcome, who gets it? Well, we're going to do a vote. These are dispute allocation, resource allocation, or rather dispute resolution / resource allocation mechanisms. But ideally, you don't want there to be a dispute in the first place. You want it to be a community that has a high level of consensus coming in, that is aligned on concepts that come from content. And, I'm not saying there's never a dispute over things. I'm not saying there's an internal discussion. But I think just that concept of striving for a high consensus community means a lot of the rest is then just like, you've built the muscle and you're just like flexing it, because the community is already aligned around that. There's, everybody believes, and to give you an example, like life extension. If you're against life extension, you want us to die. That's like a moral, live forever or die, right? And that is actually like a moral precept. It's both tautological, but it's also got a provocation to it. And it's something which pokes, I think, in the right way, and it's z-axis to a lot of the discussions that are happening right now, and it's global and it's international and it's technological, and it's also an achievement that if the community could achieve and export to the rest of the world, I mean, forget about exporting oil or gold or whatever, exporting the technology for life extension and making it as ubiquitous as an iPhone is the most important thing we can invent, right? So that's the kind of thing where I think the purpose, the community around the content comes first, and then the Constitution is an encoding of that where it is aligned towards that purpose. Slightly related to this is why, one of the things I've got in the book, this is a new thing, I haven't talked to you about this, is optimalism as opposed to maximalism or fundamentalism, right? The problem with any form of maximalism or fundamentalism is that too much is never enough. There's no limiting principle. There's no stopping criteria, okay? A good thing can be done to excess. You can poison yourself with apple juice, if you just drink water, or apple juice is carby. Okay, you could, it's a relatively small amount you poison yourself with. Water, enough dihydrogen monoxide, and you can mess yourself up pretty bad. You can drown. You have an overdose of dihydrogen monoxide. So even a good thing can be taken to extremes, and a fundamentalist and maximalist has no stopping criteria. Certainly not within their community, because they're just maximizing something. We're not getting paperclip maximizers, as the AGI guys said. We're getting, coin maximizers, right? And so the alternative to simple maximalism is what I'd call optimalism, where it's not optimism, though it's somewhat obviously, there's a connotation, an assonance with that. It's optimizing something, like in the sense of an optimization, right? And so you're setting an objective function, not in the sense of objective like disinterested, but objective in terms of goal in the mathematical sense. You set an objective function like get to Mars, or, and the metrics are like how high above the Earth did we go? How far did we go? Or you set an objective like life extension. What is the life expectancy of our community? And you have all these individual metrics that roll up to that. And so the community metric is not like some thing like GDP where, have you calculated GDP? No, right? Most people, like the metrics that America uses that they're using to steer
that'll be
the
next
country,
year's thesis.
Yeah, GDP, or even the Dow Jones, the stock market. Not everybody's a stockholder, right? Even COVID deaths. Obviously, I think of COVID as an issue, but COVID is not the Spanish flu. It's 10 million probably worldwide dead. That's going to be not 100 million, and so you can't just look at COVID deaths in isolation. You need a vector that takes all possible health things and ask whether this intervention, maybe it decreases COVID a little bit, but does it make people much fatter and it screws up their resistance in other dimensions? You need like a vector kind of model on this, right? So optimalism is a kind of related thing. You talk about the network state constitution, and it says have an explicit numerical goal as a community, and both leaders and citizens, should be basically doing actions that map to that. Sort of like a mission statement for a company, sort of like a mission statement for a country, frankly, but one that is quantitative and numerical so that you can score against. It's basically bringing company dashboard culture to a much higher level. And so now whether you did your part or not. It's not virtue signaling anymore. It's value signaling by actually provably on-chain demonstrating that you did contribute to the health of the community defined by the metrics that you opted into when you joined it. And so that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. I'm thinking about like purpose, community, content, with the code and the Constitution being important, but secondary downstream of that.
I want to have one last question just to kind of synopsize there, and maybe the 30-second version. This ties to the thesis too. It's a beast to write, not necessarily because it's long, but because it's actually relatively short, right? Like the notes version is 250 pages or whatever. So content, community, the things that you want to encode in terms of like values as an organization, how do you curate it? And I see like one of the questions here is around like Web3 search. I would actually reframe it, because my answer for like what does Web3 search look like is it's just better like values aligned like curation of information. And I'm curious, like how do you think about finding the right source of information versus just having communities that create a ton of it? Because I know this is something that kind of bleeds into early experiments you've done in 1729. So I want you to be able to kind of tie that all into.
Sure. So on the specific thing of Web3 search, I gave this talk to a Simco that actually is all new content that talks about, it's basically an investment thesis for all of crypto, all of Web3. And the short version is that web search, Google style web search, is hard for various reasons, but one reason it's hard is that indexing is actually not as easy as people think. Crawling is not that trivial. And crawling the entire web and getting notifications when sites are updated, those sites will update themselves in weird ways. They're not all built indexed. So just crawling alone is hard. And then, searching the social web, the Facebooks and Twitters, is even harder in a sense because those databases are behind their corporate, APIs, and they won't let you have access to them. What block explorers promise to do, over the last 10 years, we've only seen them basically indexing financial data. And so there wasn't a precedent for really on-chain transactions or Etherscan. So we didn't think of them as in the same category as web search or social search. But now that we're starting to get things like Mirror and DSO and other kinds of decentralized social networks, you're seeing that block explorers can expand to index not simply financial data, but social data and then data of all kinds. So block explorers are the stealth threat to search because the search indexing becomes trivial in certain ways. You're basically redefining the problem. And already I've observed, you probably have seen this yourself. There's many, many days that I will search Twitter more than Google. You probably have seen that yourself, right?
100%.
And,
yep.
Right. And so that means that social search actually is taking over. Partly it's because with Twitter, when it's an individual, I can discount them in a certain way. If I think they're editorializing, I have a mental model of them. Whereas Google is just, it's faceless and nameless, and I don't trust Google anymore, frankly. And so they're manipulating search results in a way that I don't feel I have insight into. And so whether it's DuckDuckGo or they're tracking me, all this stuff. So Twitter, at least, it's from an individual. So long as that individual wasn't censored, you kind of know where it's coming from, and you can often find better discussions. And Twitter is actually not that much data in the grand scheme of things. It's certainly much less than the web itself. So that's the kind of thing I think goes on chain in the next few years. And that's like a stealth threat to search. There's much more in that particular talk on going after data centers and other stuff. So if you're interested in like the commercial aspects of Web3, like most people are, I'm also interested in that. But first and foremost, I think about the philosophy, whatever, and the commerce is like downstream of that. But commercial aspects is go ahead.
Yeah, and incentives are going to serve the dual purpose
of
helping to curate that, number one, incentivize the creation of it, number two, and you also will be able to kind of tie reputation and kind of permanence, even if the source of that content or the curation is pseudonymous. So,
what's your last? I think you want to wrap it up. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's exactly where I was going to end it. I think. It's we could go for hours here. I know you and I both have a lot of opinions, and I don't know how Tim Ferriss does it. I don't know how he sat for 4.5 hours because 2 hours I'm getting a little antsy. As much as I love talking to you, so we'll let you go. But Balaji, same time next year, provided I actually do my part and deliver another annual report, which might kill me, but. I say that every year. You should
actually put these on Amazon, by the way. Frankly, you should, and just have them like be books, because that's something I would send a lot of people to. And obviously you've got your PDF or what have you, but it's really well done. So awesome job.
Yeah, I think I might make a three volume set from the last few years and maybe like annotate it because
it's kind of historically important, dude. It's a kind of thing that we don't. You can just sort of see things like NFTs. Obviously, you and I were aware of this for years, but then suddenly everybody's talking about it. It's this weird thing where stuff within our space, like startup cities, we know that's going to blow up. Just like when it's going to happen, I don't know. So, all right.
Balaji, thank you again. Have a great rest of the day. And for everyone else, thanks for tuning in. We will see you online in the metaverse and sometime in the near future.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Good night.
Okay, bye.
Cheers.